Hi, everybody. I'm Kari Simpson, and welcome to Culture Guard. We have a very special edition of Culture Guard for you today, a show that directly affects each and every one of you, your children, everybody you love, all your friends, and everybody that you pass on the street or in your car every day. This show is about the constitutional rights of individuals in this country to a fair and just hearing. Joining me today, we have a very special guest, someone who is very familiar to the RoadKill Radio audience, and that would be Ron Gray. Hello, Ron.
Hello, Kari.
Now, we should tell our audience, because I know we have a lot of people that just tune in for RoadKill Radio News, which we typically jointly host. Yes. We have Culture Guard, which I typically host. Occasionally, you pop in on that one. You host Family Freedom Fighters, but you have a new show.
Yes, I have. And if I were wearing my red smoking jacket, you'd recognize me from the show Drive for Justice.
And this has been airing now. It's an ongoing series in a narration form where you talk about a very interesting case.
I'm telling a story.
A story? What kind of story, Ron Gray?
Well, it's a story about justice gone wrong becoming injustice. But there's more to it than that, because once we've identified the problem, that's only the beginning of a solution. And what we're looking for is a drive for justice, a solution to the problem of injustice that has become rampant in the court systems of Canada. For that purpose, although this is Culture Guard, and I'm being interviewed as the host of Drive for Justice, I want to turn the tables and interview you.
Interview me? Why would you want to interview me?
Because, Kari Simpson, it is your case that has become the focal point of the Drive for Justice.
Well, you suspect I might know a thing or two about this case, is that it?
I think you might. And in fact, what we're going to do is examine some of the events in RoadKill Radio's Drive for Justice, summarized in a letter that you sent to Prime Minister Harper this morning.
Yes.
The springboard for this seems to be your own case, but there is really a much, much broader application. Elaborate on that for me.
Well, Ron, I think what is happening in Canada is that there has been a hijacking of the rule of law. When the Constitution, when we brought in the Charter of Freedom and our rights, the court took maybe a special privilege that maybe isn't exactly what Canadians want the court to be doing. And they became, rather than interpreting the law, in some cases, creating law, changing the law. They've read into law different provisions in law. They've read down statutes involving law. A lot of people don't know about that, but yes, there is a case where they actually read down a law of this land. But there's also a number of other problems, and that is with judicial accountability. Supposedly within the Judges Acts and other statutes, there's reference to governing bodies which are supposed to oversee our courts and the activities of our judges. One of those bodies being the Canadian Judicial Council. And supposedly we as citizens are supposed to have some faith in their ability to ensure that the administration of justice is being kept in a proper realm. And this focus that we have on the Canadian Judicial Council somehow allows judges to protect their integrity. In other words, if there was the thought that our elected, democratically placed politicians, Parliament, were to intervene in the activities of the court or call into question the actions of a judge, that's judicial interference.
Yeah.
And certainly you can speak.
Forbidden.
And that's forbidden. And there's a lot of good reasons for that as well, because we don't want politicians supposedly influencing judges and all those other things. But they also has allowed the courts, and judges in this case, to be held not accountable.
Yeah, okay, if I can be permitted an editorial comment here. When Pierre Trudeau was Prime Minister, and when he grafted the Charter of Rights and Freedoms into the Constitution, making it part of the Constitution, Pierre Trudeau was a fan of Plato's concept of philosopher kings. And his Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as it was adopted, actually created from the 9 ermine-clad justices of the Supreme Court that panel of philosopher kings and set them above the law. And
well, or so they think. There's a lot of debate on whether or not they do have that power. The problem is the way the precedents in the courts have been set is that the parliamentarians fear stepping over that boundaries for the squawkings of the justices might be too grand. And of course, Canadians haven't paid too much attention to this until recent years, because we can't ignore what has gone on and what is going on. And the pattern that presents itself, Ron Gray, is inarguable. There has to be something done. The court, as it exists today, is deeply flawed.
Judicial activism has been facilitated by judicial arrogance and the lack of accountability. Okay, but as with any case that comes to the Supreme Court, you need to have an exemplary case, a sample case, to look at what the problems, the putative problems are.
Well, and there has been a lot written prior to our Drive for Justice campaign about what has gone on in the courts. There has been due criticism, justified, in the form of books, legal documents, a lot of discussion within the courts, within judges themselves. But so it's not limited to what we're about to present here. There's a history, a well-established history, precedent, if we dare use the term.
There's been books written about
Absolutely.
it, sure. But the specific case of Kari Simpson versus Rafe Mair and WIC Corporation provides a focus on virtually every aspect of the problems that are rife in the judicial system. And it begins, well, I guess it begins with the fact that a lawyer and politician, I stress lawyer because he's a member of the legal brotherhood, the club, the brethren, named Rafe Mair, who was a prominent talk show host in the greater Vancouver market area.
The most listened to. And deservedly so on some fronts.
Well, and in fact, once he encountered you and your work on behalf of families that were being abused by the government, and made you a regular participant on his show, that was when his ratings really blossomed.
Well, and there's a bit of irony in that, isn't there? Because literally it was Rafe Mair who catapulted me into public life, whether I want to be here or not. And it seems I have a bit of a destiny. And whether or not we bless Rafe for that or curse him, I guess we'll find out in a few years.
Well, and then Rafe found out some things about you, including your commitment as a Judeo-Christian, a believer in the God of the Bible.
Well, ironically, interesting you bring that up, because I've never talked about that with Rafe. Rafe made assumptions about my religious beliefs that became very evident in the editorials that are the catalyst for this series. But he admitted in court that his assertions about my religious beliefs and his weird and perverted twists on them, he never did discuss those matters with me. So there's an assumption in all of what Rafe has done that's not based in fact or knowledge, just on, this is a convenient way to manufacture a reputation for this individual who I know is a Christian, and I don't want her in an influential place.
Well, and that comes out in an episode of the Drive for Justice that we call the Happy Years.
Yeah.
There was a period when the two of you worked very well together on behalf of aggrieved citizens who needed defending. And he used the power of his pulpit as a talk show host, a broadcaster with a huge audience, to bring a lot of leverage to force the government to pay attention to the cases that you were working with, the people you were defending.
Those were in the good times, and I think it shows the power of of what Rafe Mair had on his throne at CKNW, and a power that's very important to our democracy, but a power that, when abused, needs to be punished.
It's kind of like the courts. Very important to our justice system. A free press, a free media
requirement.
Very important to the public examination of what's going on. But both must be held responsible and accountable.
Absolutely.
Okay, then Rafe Mair went on a 2-year tirade of editorials aimed at you, in which he said some things that the courts later established were defamatory and libelous.
And hateful and all those other things. Now, it's interesting, and I think we should, for the purposes of our audience understanding of what's going on here, is, Rafe admits in one of his letters of support to me that Kari Simpson was willing to take up, the unpopular campaigns, families who were having their children apprehended, kids and families who may have needed help but were being abused rather than helped. And when I see injustice, Ron, when I see people being bullied and abused by the government, when I see government overstepping the bounds into the lives of families, that will get my attention. I don't care what the topic is. I don't care what the issue is, whether it's the low-income families being abused or high-income families being falsely accused of abusing their children. Those are equally disturbing to me because it's the relationship between the state and the citizenry. The state has never proven itself to be a good parent, and we continuously see people being abused for the purposes of government coffers in a lot of sense, because there's a lot of job creation made out of destroying families and having to take care of them and all the rest of it. So my big sin, if there is one, and what turned the tables on this, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I've dealt with a lot of issues. I have dealt with unpopular issues. I have brought to the forefront of public scrutiny issues that people don't want to deal with, like the deaths of little kids in the care of the government. But there's one subject matter in this country that defies any logic. And I have been involved in these campaigns long enough to see how stupid, number one, a lot of Canadians are on this subject, how conditioned we are to conform to a line of thinking in this subject, and really that this subject does need to be discussed and debated in a healthy, logical way without the name calling from the sex activists. And what I'm talking about is an issue that involves the term homosexuality, which seems to give license to everybody's brains to go on vacation, and the rules of civility from the left side and the pro-sex activist side to be fair game on anybody else. And certainly, I actually wrote and said to the Supreme Court of Canada in one of my legal documents on this, it's interesting, but this subject matter tends to just offer up this hysterical way of dealing with things. It has no basis in truth. It doesn't seem to have any basis in reality or common sense. And I think if I plug away at this long enough, and I have already seen some changes on this, so that's the good news, people. But the events that involve this case, and people, this is just only part of the legal stuff. I have 30 boxes and bookshelves and rooms dedicated to the legal documents here. But so I dared to raise up the rights of parents in the public education system and required sex activist teachers in a corrupt government to follow their own rules. And this is my sin. I'm ready to confess it. I demanded that the Ministry of Education and that the schools obey their own policies and simply tell parents what they're teaching the kids. I am guilty of that.
All right. Now, but that was what, I guess, what offended him. Prior to that, Rafe Mair had actually fulsomely endorsed your nomination as British Columbian of the Year and said that wasn't enough. You should be Canadian of the Year.
And you did a brilliant job on, people check out the Drive for Justice campaign at driveforjustice.com. There's a number of shows already underway there. You can catch from episode 1 on down, but you deal with that
and more coming, and we'll get into good detail there. But then came this 40-plus editorials, and I know.
Oh, come on! It's not 40-plus. It's a campaign of hate.
A campaign, and
lies.
I note that he gets multiple use out of his editorials because he uses them in
he
broadcast
recycles and
print
does all kinds of
online,
things.
But so eventually, because he did say some untrue things about you.
Oh, untrue! You are such a diplomat. Maligned, vicious, hateful, contemptuous.
Well, the court said it was defamation.
And hate.
And that it was libelous and it was hateful. So you sued him. That made good sense.
Now, I should also say, because I think it's important, being the reasonable person I am, and I don't back away from public controversy. I think, boy, if somebody wants to make those statements, then they should have the balls to stand behind them and debate me in person. Guess who was so chicken and cowardly that he wouldn't let me on his show? Rafe Mair. Rafe Mair had full knowledge what he was doing was wrong and that the information he was spreading was false. I wrote to him. I wrote numerous times. I wrote to the management at CKNW. But, those ratings were just clicking in. And, there's a value to controversy. Kari's reputation obviously is expendable.
Yeah.
And so is the truth. And so are the kids and what was going on in the public education system.
So your case went to court. There was a problem unbeknownst to you, there were problems with the judge who was sitting on your case originally.
Well, there were a lot of problems. I have been a firm believer that I don't go to the tennis game with a badminton racket. So when Rafe finally, on October 25th, 1999, published the most vile, hateful editorial that anyone could concoct, I hired soon-to-be president of the Canadian Bar Association. He was vice president at the time, Eric Rice, and he was made a judge short time thereafter. I thought, okay, if anybody, you go with the best equipment. And I thought I had it. Regrettably, this was one of the first problems. I didn't find this out until the Court of Appeal. It seems that Eric Rice, the soon-to-be judge and president of the Canadian Bar Association, didn't follow the rules of the court in how he drafted my pleadings.
You're going to begin to see a pattern emerging here that there is a club, a legal brotherhood, that circles the wagons and protects its own.
Now, I'm just going to make a quick note on that too. The sad part about that isn't the fact, it's tragic enough. The lawyer, who you think should know better, didn't follow the rules of court. That would mean that the trial judge didn't either.
Well, and we'll deal in detail on Drive for Justice with some of the reasons why that trial judge should not have been on the bench for that case. Just to give it a quick summary, her own spouse was at the same time involved in an almost identical defamation suit. He'd been on the internet with anti-Semitic ravings and things, and
was being sued.
And was being sued. And in fact, there was a judgment against him.
Two different lawsuits.
And when that judgment from California courts was brought to be applied by the BC courts, there was a fraudulent conveyance of assets to protect them from the lawsuit.
Oh, but wait a minute, Ron. That's only when us ordinary people do it, right? Somehow when a justice of the BC Supreme Court, knowing that her personal asset worth almost $1 million, in this case a home in Vancouver.
That was back when $1 million was $1 million.
Well, yes. It's considerably more now. Yeah. Decided to protect that from the legal action of which it was entitled to be part of and claimed to, transferred the name from the joint asset of her and her spouse, Lubomir Prytulek, to her own name only. Now, there is an act in BC called the Fraudulent Conveyance Act that makes it very clear you can't do that.
No, and of course, the law says in Canada that a judge is protected from lawsuits and things like that while he or she is of good behavior. Violating the Fraudulent Conveyance Act vitiates that it eliminates that good behavior
Do you
protection.
Think?
I think so, yeah.
Now, okay. This is where you Canadians are going to have to ask yourself, is a judge to be considered of good behavior, and we know because we've talked to enough people about this, when he or she is breaking the law, obstructing justice.
So okay, to condense the case very quickly, the judge heard all the evidence
without telling us what she was, the perception of bias.
Yeah, but nevertheless, she concluded that you had been defamed, that it was libelous and hateful. But then she did something really strange. She called you and the defendant into her chambers and said,
"You owe her an apology, Rafe Mair."
Well, there's a good evidence that you have won.
And then she went on this tangent, which was most shocking to me, Ron, about how she's pro-choice and I'm pro-life. And I remember thinking...
Which is irrelevant to this case.
Totally irrelevant. This case was simply about, number one, the Ministry of Education policy saying, tell parents when you teach something on sensitive subject matters, like
which is what you said.
Fine.
Okay.
My public record is put whatever you want into the schools, as bad as you want. Just tell parents what you're teaching. That's it. And for that, all this.
So then, after having concluded that he had defamed you, that he had libeled you,
that he owed me an apology,
that he owed you an apology,
and he needed to settle this,
then she urged the two of you to settle it out of court.
Right. Because, as she looked at me and she said, Mrs. Simpson, you and Mr. Mair are both very influential people in this province. You can help the court here. Huh? Me help the court? Well, I'm not there to help the court. The court's there to make Rafe Mair stop lying.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So she tempered her own decision to the point that she let him go.
Well, no, she didn't. Well, no, you know what? She did, because my antennas came into full upright position at the settlement conference, because our case was a slam dunk.
Yeah.
There was no way around it. Rafe testified he never heard me speak. How can you have a honest belief in what you said if you admit you never heard her speak on the issue? He lied repeatedly, over and over and over again in his editorials, all proven. I proved the damage to myself. We proved everything. We met every legal test that we required. But when we were called into the settlement conference, I knew something was afoot. I knew that this was something was going to come down, and I made that. I said, the fix was in, and sure enough, in her decision, because of course Rafe Mair refused to settle at that moment. In her decision, she said Rafe Mair defamed me. He did so maliciously. He promoted hatred and contempt for Kari Simpson and her ilk. And I know you're going to be discussing ilk on your Drive for Justice show. Ilk.
Yeah, okay.
But then she started putting all these twists in that, his assertions weren't based. He didn't assert them as fact. He based them on comments.
Even though he said these are the facts.
These are the facts. Yeah. And there's a good saying. A lie is far more believable when it's embedded in truth. And one of my great sayings when I'm out speaking publicly is, great deceptions are 90% truth. It's that 10% twist at the end. If you outright lie, nobody's going to believe you. But if you couch that lie in a little bit of credibility, you're a shoo-in. And certainly the shenanigans of Justice Koenigsberg are masterful. I will give her credit, for her ability, her mastery of engaging in trickster words within a decision.
Well, so then what? Then you appealed.
We appealed to the Court of Appeal.
Decision and won.
Yes, the unanimous decision. The Court of Appeal made some great revelations in this. And ironically, the Court of Appeal, I will spank them a bit here, the opening paragraph of the Court of Appeal decision slam-based this right into a religious argument, which this never was. This is about civil morality, the role of the teacher in the public education system, the role of parents in guiding the education of their children. But suddenly the courts, everybody wants to make this into a big religious war. So, as I say, if they want a religious war, now they've got one. Okay, so the Court of Appeal writes this amazing decision, agrees with me. The facts are not supported in what Rafe Mair said. How can anyone have an honest belief? They also point out this revelation about the pleadings in this case, and they reprimand the drafter of my pleading, saying, you ought to have followed the rules. Libel law is a minefield. And certainly, again, if my lawyer didn't follow the rules, neither did Justice Koningsberg. Absolutely.
Circle the wagon. So you won at the BC Court of Appeal. Right. So WIC, which is CKNW's, or at that time was their corporation, they appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada, and that's where things really got weird.
Oh, this is more weird. Can we just get more weird? I think we got weird almost at every level. Yeah, we go up there. There's a whole bunch of other stories about the legal wranglings with my lawyers and stuff in between this, which is another show for driveforjustice.com. But no, we get up to the Supreme Court of Canada, and I attended on December 4th, sitting in the gallery there, and listened as my name was mentioned with a brand new label. I mean, you know how many labels I have. And suddenly the Justice Binney makes reference to Kari Simpson being roadkill on the highway of public controversy.
Guess where the name RoadKill Radio comes from.
I have to say, I did crack up, but then we all know I have a warped sense of humor, and probably a good thing, because I think this case and the events that I've witnessed, and after spending now over $1 million on the legal case and what I've had to do to level the playing field of justice here, it's a good thing I might have the ability to laugh in a very determined way about events, because certainly the events at that moment were about to change significantly, because the Supreme Court of Canada bestowed a very special favor to me. They excluded me from the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in their decision. I am so special, people, that I don't qualify as an everyone, as all of you do. Or, well, no, I don't think you would. You're my ilk. Yeah. Everyone except the ilk gets this document and the protection of it. But
I don't see anything about the ilk on here. I don't. It's okay.
Well, no, and in my letter to the Prime Minister, I basically ask him, where's the statutory authority for the Supreme Court of Canada to deny the right of a citizen to know the legal test they have to meet? Well, obviously, we're going to wait for his answer on that one, because that's exactly what the Supreme Court of Canada did. They came down with their decision. They restored the decision of the corrupt judge who should never have been sitting on the case to begin with. They modified the law to convenience
the law in midstream.
And they admit that.
Oh, and there's a reference in here to another case that quotes your case as evidence that when the law is changed, it must be either referred back to the original court or given a new trial.
Right.
That didn't happen.
No, again, I guess I'm so special that I wasn't given this right, and it is a right to know the legal test. Certainly, other people have been given the right, courtesy of my case, to go back and have a new trial. But when the Supreme Court of Canada changed the legal test, applied it to my lawsuit, and said, tough luck, honey, we're moving the goalposts.
Well, so now 3 courts, though, had established that the maledictions against you were lies, but the last of these courts cloaked it with the cover of honest opinion or honest comment, fair comment.
No, what they did is they redefined what honest belief. You see, you and I assume honest belief has to be entrenched or embedded in some
founded on some fact.
It doesn't. Wrong again, people. Yeah. It's all been changed. You can say whatever the hell you want, as long as you honestly believe it, even if it's outrageous, unfounded, of not sane mind, you're okay.
But then the courts did something that to me is unprecedented. From the bench, the court itself reiterated the lies and put them on the record, and now they're out there circulating on the internet.
Oh, Ron, don't underestimate them. They did better than that. They manufactured a whole new set of them. Not only did they bolster the harm that Rafe Mair has already done with his lies,
they intensified
and created a few new ones, people. It just, I wish I had lived that life because
No.
it's almost interesting.
Kari Simpson, let me take this now to the larger dimension, because we've been talking about your case. As with any case that goes to the Supreme Court of Canada, they have to have a case at issue in order to consider the legal ramifications.
Right.
Let me lift this to the larger dimension that involves all Canadians. What's at stake here for the ordinary citizen out there watching Drive for Justice and wondering, what are my courts about? Who is in charge? To whom are these unelected judges accountable, if ever? What's the larger dimension of this?
Well, I think what the cases before mine have demonstrated through, far more learned minds in law, and they've, of course, written and historically recorded those events. What this case does, I think, is it drives home the fact that, number one, the courts are out of control. They need to be held into account. The Constitution Act, Section 101, has this wonderful little provision in it, Ron. Yeah. And it assigns the duty of the better administration of law in Canada to Parliament. There is no question that it is Parliament's duty, when confronted with this kind of abuse, with this kind of corruption, with this incredibly overt display of criminal activity, the obstruction of justice and the violation of my rights, that they are compelled, that they have to be compelled to do something about it. And certainly in my letter to the Prime Minister, that's what I asked.
Quoting Section 101 of the Constitution Act, the Parliament of Canada may, notwithstanding anything in this Act, from time to time provide for the constitution, maintenance, and organization of a General Court of Appeal for Canada, and for the establishment of any additional courts for the better administration of the laws of Canada.
What we have in my case and the others, and I want to make sure that this isn't just the one-off, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I'd like to think I'm that special, but I know
it's the broader thing at issue here.
The fact is that the courts are broken. The courts, as they stand now in the administration of justice, which is the cornerstone to our free and democratic society, is structurally being dismantled by the conduct of these corrupt judges. We can't tolerate that. If we value our liberty, if we value all the great things about our country, we require our courts to be operating lawfully. They are not. When we can prove that, the Prime Minister is duty bound. There isn't a discussion. There isn't a debate on this, Ron Gray. He must act.
I'm Ron Gray, the host of Drive for Justice. I've come onto this program of Culture Guard and usurped your chair as host in order to interview Kari Simpson about a case that is important to every Canadian because, as Kari has said, our courts are broken. The justices who have elevated themselves above the law are not being held accountable. Parliament has the constitutional authority to make them become accountable to the Constitution. This letter to our Prime Minister demands that he do exactly that on your behalf as well as hers, as well as mine.
And Ron, I want to say this. I'm taking this initiative. I don't have a choice. My conscience would not allow me to just ignore what's gone on here. But this is going to need more help than Kari Simpson's feisty stubbornness and tenacity. This requires all of us to become a bit informed, and certainly the Drive for Justice campaign and the driveforjustice.com has been developed to assist you. There are the tools there to help you. You can go to driveforjustice.com, see the letter to the Prime Minister. We need you to take initiative. We all know we have to participate in this democracy. You need to phone him. You need to write to him. You need to demand that your MPs become involved, because if we don't clean up the courts, there's no hope. We have no opportunity of appeal when we see government go out of control, Ron, unless we can make sure we have confidence in the courts. Right now, public trust in the courts is not validated. You cannot look at what this case represents and say, I trust those judges. I trust the Canadian Judicial Council. I trust the Supreme Court of Canada. That is not available to Canadians at this moment in time. We need to change that. I intend to change that. I intend to change that with your help. So please sign on to driveforjustice.com. Give us your addresses. Make sure other people see this, because this is about our rights, your rights, my rights, those of your children. If we don't stand up and fight to protect our rights, then we will lose them, people. We've already lost them. I mean, here's a perfect example of it. I am going to fight back. I'm going to take a stand and say, I'm not going to tolerate this. This is wrong. This is un-Canadian. This is unconstitutional. Please join us in this endeavor.
I'm telling Kari Simpson, I will stand with you. Will you say the same? I'm Ron Gray. This has been Culture Guard.